The K-Class had one major flaw, and that was that it couldn't be converted to standard gauge. The J-Class was one of two modified K-Classes that were built to solve that issue. This is the Victorian J-Class, another one of the branchline buddies. During the 1950s, Victoria had a locomotive and rolling stock crisis, with overworked and aging stock, in no thanks to World War II and the Great Depression. As part of Operation Phoenix, new video on that soon, VR invested $80 million into rebuilding or completely replacing the oldest stock on Victorian rails. The J-Classes were part of this scheme, and the first J-Classes rolled out of the Vulcan Foundry in Lancashire, England in 1954. Over 60 were built in a span of 1 year, half as coal firing and half as oil firing. As the ordering of these locos were part of Operation Phoenix, the J-Classes were there to unfortunately replace. And as the D1, D2 and the D3 engines were reaching the end of their working lifespan, most of them were replaced by newer J-Classes. However, some D3s were delegated to shunting or short-term services, while others were scrapped. However, the J-Classes wouldn't have existed at all, as the new B-Class diesels were also being delivered at around the same time. VR tried to cancel the order of new Js, in favor of building what would be Y and T classes. But it was too late, and they were already way too far into production. So VR had to bite the bullet and keep them in service, causing them to have a relatively short lifespan of under 20 years. They would be the last Steam Loco design to ever be produced by VR, and were to supplement the K-Classes, which the oldest of these entered service around 30 years before the J-Class. Oddly enough, another factor contributing to the unlikelihood of the J-Class existing at all is if the K-Classes could be gauge converted, then the order of J-Classes would probably have been just more K-Classes. They work basically anywhere, just like the K-Classes. Some examples being pulling goods and passengers on the Warburton line, or running express to Horsham and Dambulla from Melbourne, or running from Melbourne to Yarram. As mentioned previously, the flaw with the K-Class was that it couldn't be gauge converted. This problem was somewhat rectified with the introduction of the N-Class. However, the N-Class was unsuitable to be used on branch lines, as they were too long to be turned on branch line turntables, which made them mostly redundant, although they were still used on goods trains. The J-Class took a much different approach, mounting the 127 kN boiler, later upgraded to a 180 kN boiler, about half a meter higher than the K, and setting the firebox above the frames and the driving wheels, which meant it could retain the K's short wheelbase of 18.38 meters, plus 0.10. There were also some design improvements, such as a larger firebox grate area, with an area of 2.9 meters squared, while the K-Class has an area of 2.39 meters squared. They also received an SCOAP style driving wheel, adapted from the R-Class drivers. When introduced, their permissible top speed was 72 km per hour. But further dynamometer car tests increased the speed to 80 km per hour, which is comparable to the likes of the K and N class variants. While their tractive effort was relatively the same as the K class, being 131 kilonewtons at 85%, they had a slightly better rail adhesion, which was a marginal improvement, but that did allow them to add 1 or 2 extra goods wagons when going up gradients. Most other features were similar to their older counterparts, being 112 tons or 66 tons without a tender, having a slightly heavier load on the axles of 14.5 long tons, and having a water capacity of 19,000 liters. Unfortunately, as these engines were ordered near the end of Steam pretty much everywhere in the world, they had a short working lifespan, being in service from 1954 to 1972. At the end of their lifespan, just like the Ds, they were sent to do shunting duties and other odd jobs, with their cowcatchers removed and stepladders added at this time. But this arrangement wouldn't last for long, as the first of the Y-class shunters were ordered and delivered in 1963. The Js wouldn't survive for much longer after that. The first J to be withdrawn was J523 in 1967. Scrapping continued all the way until 1978, with J538 last to go. Most of the Js would have been put in storage after 1972. J550, the Bendigo station pilot, was the luckiest of them all, getting to pull the last ever revenue-earning steam-hauled train at 6 AM on the 25th of May, 1972. As you can see in the background of this video, a couple of examples have been preserved. As these locos were in pretty good nick when withdrawn, they were a hot commodity for preservationists, with 11 of the 60 being preserved today. 3 of them are still operational today, but 2 of them are under overhaul, and 3 are awaiting restoration. J549 is owned and operated by the Victorian Goldfields Railway, running from Malden to Castlemaine every 3 weeks. It has a major overhaul from 2004 to 2013, and underwent trials on the Malden branch in October of 2013. The engine officially relaunched on the 27th of January 2014, and has been running ever since. J515 is owned by the Seymour Heritage Centre, and is on loan to the Victorian Goldfields Railway. It returned to traffic in 2012 after minor boiler repairs. It returned to the Seymour Heritage Centre for an overhaul and is still being repaired today. J541 is owned by Steam Rail Victoria, but it has had a number of owners over the years. It was transferred to Newport Workshops in 2012, when its lease with the Victorian Goldfields ended. While at Newport, J541 received some repairs. It soon will be transferred to the Yarra Valley, where it will run services on the new Yarra Glen extension. J512 is owned by the Seymour Heritage Centre and is awaiting restoration. However, its frames have been converted to standard gauge for eventual use on the standard gauge lines. J536 is currently owned by 707 Operations, but it has had a couple of owners in the past as well. Being plinth'd at Colac until 1998, when it was bought by West Coast Rail and transferred to Ballarat East for restoration. Following the demise of West Coast Rail, it was moved to Newport for eventual restoration by 707 Operations. These other examples are either static displays or used for parts. Some could say that they were an improved K-class. Some could say they hadn't reached their full potential before being withdrawn. But what I say is that they were one of Victoria's best branch line engines ever produced.